Hey there, welcome to Embracing New Life, the podcast where we explore the intersection of mental health and the church. This week we are diving into the fourth and final part of a four-part series called Debunking Myths 2.0, challenging the beliefs Christians hold about counseling. Over the course of this series, we have been looking at 18 common myths that Dr. Dan Green has encountered throughout his decades in the counseling profession. Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or somewhere in between, join us as we uncover the truths behind these misconceptions. You know what time it is. Grab your favorite beverage, find a comfortable spot, and sit back and relax. Or, if you prefer, take us along on your walk or while you get things done. Either way, let's dive into today's episode. Myth number 13. Christian counselors have a vested interest in fostering dependency and dragging out treatment.
I was just thinking of the waiting list. The demand for care in our culture right now is greater than the resources to provide the care.
Yeah.
The counselor, Christian or not, that would promote dependency, they're out of bounds.
Yeah.
Could it happen? It does occasionally. There are times it does. It's inappropriate. That needs to be addressed. But what happens almost always, most often, is that we're working to facilitate the counselee increasing agency, increasing independence, facilitating them living well in their world.
Yeah.
And so, much like we might talk about in a different realm of life, in parenting, we work to work ourselves out of a job.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We want to see them launch, if we want to use that analogy.
Yes.
We want to see them launch well into life and be able to face the challenges of life in a healthy, consistent way.
Right.
Yep. Good. Okay, number 14, myth 14. Christian counselors use bizarre techniques.
When this has been presented to me, I'm immediately curious. What do you consider bizarre?
Exactly. Yeah.
Most of what Christian counselors are doing is relational and using various types of structured experiences.
Yeah.
So, one bizarre technique I was accused of using was I was asking the person to imagine that they were in Psalm 23. Did not think that was a very controversial psalm. And in Psalm 23, imagine being a sheep that is experiencing going through the valley. The shepherd is there, experiencing moving into the pasture, being protected, etc.
Yeah. Yep.
The pastor that was concerned about this was concerned that I was dehumanizing and asking them to use their imagination, denying God's power. Now, I had a hard time tracking with that.
Yeah.
But what I was encouraging them to do there is to take a God-designed capacity of imagination, using an image given to us that actually David had already imagined being the sheep.
Yeah, exactly.
This was not very creative on my part, frankly. But that was the experience is bizarre. Often bizarre means it's something I don't do myself.
Yeah.
Or I'm unfamiliar with.
Exactly.
There's much we see in Scripture of using things like imagery, allegory, metaphor, parable, of ways in our dialogue, in our talk therapies, in our dialogue of developing experience different than we had before. And that's often what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a fair thing to say that, in the spectrum of Christian counselors, that can mean a lot of different things, right? So you can definitely come across somebody who would identify as a Christian counselor that maybe does have bizarre techniques that they use, but by and large, like you said, the techniques that we're using are for the good of the client and for the healthy functioning of them in this world.
You raised something earlier that's important to note here too. is the counselee is not a passive recipient in the process.
Yeah.
That counselees will say, I don't understand that, or I'm not comfortable with that.
Yep.
And so the counselor pauses. The counselor dialogues. We talk about it as informed consent.
Yep.
And when people come to understand what's trying to be done, they can say, I'm not good with that. All right, we go to the next option.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's good to know, because I think that agency, we've talked a lot about agency already, but that agency, even for the counselee in the meeting room, is an important thing for them to understand, because they really do. It's their journey. They're the ones in the driver's seat, and we're trying to make it the best experience and journey for them as we can.
That's right. And we do that collaboratively.
Yeah.
It's not just something one does to the other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good. Okay, myth number 15. Some of the people who come to Christian counselors don't get better or even get worse.
True. Now, let's take a look at what that means. The reality is there are so many things that influence any scenario.
Yeah, yep.
And we could look at all kinds of factors. I've got a friend who's an oncologist, and he shares with me a great number, because of his area of specialty, a great number of the people that come to him die. And things aren't the way they're supposed to be in this world.
Yep.
But he provides a great service, even though the outcome is that his patients die. Another man sitting at the table identified, well, frankly, that's true of everybody. Because no matter what, we do face the realities, the consequences of sin, the ultimate being death.
Yeah, yep.
Now, in our work, sometimes things get more difficult before they get better.
Yeah.
Sometimes people have chronic mental health issues that do deteriorate across the lifespan, or they do get worse because of any number of factors.
Most definitely.
Sometimes people make choices in a therapy process that make things worse. Quit therapy, they move on and do their own thing. Lots and lots of factors that go into this. Like everything in life, there's not the guarantee that I get the outcome I want.
Yeah.
But rather, what we strive to do is, in a collaborative, open process, work towards that which is good.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's good. That's good to understand, because, some people, despite, treatment, can definitely get worse. And that's true for us physically as well as mentally. Yeah. Myth 16. Christian counselors have the power to make choices for others, or Christian counselors are responsible for the actions their clients take.
Earlier we talked about the boundaries of responsibility. I am responsible for how I treat, in this case, the counselee.
Yeah.
And how I take care of myself. I'm not responsible for the choices they make. We can offer good and it can be refused. We can offer good and it can be misunderstood. We can offer good and the other use it in a destructive way.
Yeah.
This confusion of responsibility leads to this myth. Anyone who's a parent will recognize, or at least a parent of a child older than about 8 months, that I can do the right thing for my child, and they may respond well or not.
Yeah.
For they are unique and separate from me. And the idea that the Christian counselor or any counselor is responsible for what the other does is such a denial of the boundaries that God has designed us to have. It's a very dangerous perspective to take. So while the counselor is always responsible for what they do, it's impossible for them to be responsible for what the counselee does.
Yeah. Because even good advice can be misinterpreted, right?
Absolutely.
Like, you see that in Scripture where Jesus is looking on Jerusalem, and he said, "How how oh Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I long to like take you under my wing like a mother hen would take her chicks under her wing.
Yeah.
So and he totally only had good for
Right.
Israel. And they totally misunderstood and misinterpreted, the good that he was trying to offer them. And so, yeah,
Right.
he was not responsible for those actions. They were totally responsible. But
Sometimes I'll hear, "Oh, we were quoting you," and all of a sudden I get tense, like, "Okay, let's see where this goes."
or I'm sure I've done some public speaking too. I'm sure you've had the same phenomenon where you communicate a message and then you hear from two different people in the same audience, and it's like two different perspectives. They take
Yes.
two totally
Yes.
almost totally different things away from the same thing that you said.
Right.
It's it's just it's incredible how individuals can independently interpret the data that they're given.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Myth 17. We only hear about problems with Christian counselors.
This myth has surfaced typically when there's been a problem in a family or a divorce or some scenario like this, where the leaders of this church thought everything was good, and then, well, they went to Christian counseling and look what happened.
Okay, sure.
We tend not to seek counseling until we have a need strong enough that everything else we've tried hasn't helped.
Yeah.
Let's try this.
Yeah.
So most typically, when a person seeks our services, they already are in a rough spot.
Yeah.
And what we're starting with is often a point of great need and confusion and pain, and sometimes some very destructive things have already been in process. So yes, it would be true that typically upon presentation, there are problems. It's the only reason why they would come.
Yeah.
Now, the other element of this is very often people aren't sharing what's happening in their counseling process because there's still a lot of stigma around being in counseling.
Sure.
So, if it's not broke, if it's broke, don't fix it. If things are going well for them, often people keep that very confidential.
Sure.
What we hear about is when it's not going well and that person is complaining or making their point known. At that point, that's a point of intervention. That's a point of opportunity.
Yeah.
That we could then, instead of saying, oh, that it's bad, rather, what's the problem? What can we do about it?
Yeah. And once again, this is one of those phenomenons where maybe you do have some samples of bad Christian counselors or counselors that would identify as Christians that are, corrupting, one bad apple ruins the whole batch, and so, or barrel or whatever it is. And so, it's good to understand that, there's a lot more good being done and probably not seen than there is bad.
Yes, and that a limitation that we have, appropriate limitation for the safety of our clients, is without permission, we can say nothing about what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
So we can't share the good news.
Yep.
Or when we are told in a public setting about, oh, they were in the counseling with you and it was da-da-da-da, we can't respond to that.
Yeah.
Which is appropriate that we don't.
For sure.
But it should be understood that that's not sharing the whole story.
Yeah.
The reality that one person's experience is theirs, but it's not the whole story.
For sure, yeah. Good. Great perspective. The last and final myth, number 18. Christian counselors have the same role as a pastor.
There's a lot of confusion around this. And some pastors I've talked to have been threatened by us. And because our culture has moved into a more therapeutic culture, so many of our churches have kind of taken on a therapeutic Christianity instead of the full gospel, that there is legitimate confusion here.
Sure.
Our roles are very differently defined, and I think that's an excellent thing that they are.
Mm-hmm.
Our roles are to address the behavioral, social, relational, emotional, mental health functioning of a person. Now, all of those variables include the spiritual, but that isn't our focus. It's because a person is a whole, we do deal with the whole person.
Yeah.
Just like a physician may be focusing on the GI tract, but they're dealing with a whole person. They'll talk about all the rest of being a person as well, often. The role of the pastor as a shepherd, as a teacher, the administrative and the caring for the faith community is distinct from the specialized roles we have dealing with individual or small group or family, dealing with their behavioral and mental health type concerns.
Yeah.
We teach also, and this is why it's so good to work in tandem with the church.
Sure.
Is so that our teachings support one another rather than being seen as in conflict with one another.
Yep. Yeah. So even though there may be some things that look similar, it's good to identify that the roles are completely different, and used for specific reasons that are different. So, yeah, good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that concludes our, the myths that you wrote about in this paper that, we'll probably upload with the podcast so people can read it if they want to. Was there anything else that you wanted to add as we're coming to a close here?
Yeah, I think there's two reasons why these myths persist. And one is that, as I mentioned at the beginning, unless you are in dialogue with someone that is involved in as a Christian counselor, how else will you know? There is some literature out there that we can refer you to, but the best way to understand this is be in dialogue with one of us.
Yeah.
And we want to dialogue with those who are interested about how we integrate our faith in our practice. I think we all benefit from those discussions.
For sure.
And second, that the fears often drive this. And it's important, fears and emotion that signals something is threatening, something is dangerous. And what is the danger?
Yeah.
And if we could dialogue around what we perceive the danger to be, I have found the fears diminish quite quickly.
Yeah.
Often the danger is a what if, but not what is.
Yeah. And that fear driving the desire to avoid and needing to not let the fear keep you from asking the questions or dialoguing with, a Christian counselor, but really embrace that so you can better understand, what is it, or what questions do you have that can be answered?
It's our desire to work in a supportive and cooperative way with the local church and facilitate people being part of a faith community.
Yeah, and finding the need or finding the support that they need,
Right.
Especially in their time of need, for sure.
Yep.
Well, good. Well, I guess that's everything.
Thanks for joining us as we journey through this 4-part series titled Debunking Myths 2.0, Challenging the Beliefs Christians Hold About Counseling. We hope you found this episode both interesting and helpful. Don't forget to follow Embracing New Life and turn on notifications so you're ready when our next episode drops on Monday.
Embracing New Life is a production of New Life Resources, a Christian counseling clinic in Southeast Wisconsin, whose aim and goal since 1976 has been to provide high-quality professional counseling, psychological, and consulting services from within a Christian framework.